Sir, I, excuse me. I need to be able to see the screen. Thank you. Okay. Just got finished doing the Urza and Zoro death battle. It's about just as bad as I remembered. It's not nearly as bad as the Natsu versus Ace one. I feel like that more so than Urza and Zoro, I'm gonna be annoyed with how poorly they do Gray on this one. Because one thing that's different about them versus this video is the Natsu and Urza videos for Death Battle came out 6 years ago, and Alvarez was still underway during it all. Whereas this one came out 4 years ago, so Alvarez had been fully concluded, and I think 2020. Yeah, we should have. We already had 100 Years quest going, so I don't think Gray had anything kind of crazy in terms of upgraded material or just new things or scaling at the time of. But still, it's like I don't even think they even talk about the fact that he can just eat all of Esdeath's attacks, everything that she does at him. He's gonna eat, gain magic back, gain stamina back, and then eventually, he can just break through, put in his demonic stuff. And then on top of that, his devil ice is different than normal ice. And obviously, one thing we can look at, like Gray froze fire at the start of the series. And when you compare like his ice to normal ice, even with his ice make, clearly his brand of ice is above like what you would just see with standard ice. But with devil ice, it wasn't even remotely melting at all from Natsu's fire back in the Sun Village, which was from Silver. And clearly Gray post Alvarez is much more powerful than Silver, so Gray's gonna have much more capable ice. And it's like when you have ice that isn't even bothered by fire far hotter than like magma and can melt steel no problem, it's like, well, where do they think that somebody who's using regular ice attacks is even going to come into play? And I think the only thing that really Esdeath would have is a sword, but like Gray just freezes the sword. Because the difference too, and this is one thing that I'm curious if they mention, I really don't think that they do, is that Gray has a way to both copy, adapt, and assimilate other people's ice into his own stuff. For instance, obviously, like he was able to adapt to Invil's True Ice Kamuy, and then he was able to adapt to Hakune's ice when she tried to use her spiritual arts to freeze his. Right here, knocking stuff over. To freeze his magic and curse power and everything. So obviously, with the bit with Hakune, it happened later. But when you have stuff like clearly like knowing how Slayers work, he can both adapt and copy it, adapt to it with his Devil Slayer abilities, copy it with his Ice Make abilities, and then as we saw when he channeled the Devil Slayer like attribute, like the old devil attribute out of Silver's ice, he was able to manipulate it. So he's able to manipulate other people's ice as well. And this is again something that, when it comes down to it, it sounds very unfair, but as I always say, like it's not really an argument to complain about something being unfair in a match that is designed to not be fair, because Slayer wizards are designed to counter two things: the elements that they are set in, their whole attribute, and the species of creature they're fighting. So with Gray, ice-based things and devil and demon-based things, and Esdeath has both of those. Because another thing that I'll mention is, going into it, maybe they will mention it, it's been 4 years, so I don't remember, is Gray has extra capabilities when fighting devils and demons. Like his ice is more potent. He's able to counteract their powers more. And he's able just to achieve higher peaks when going up against it, what he's designed to counter. So that's just something to mention before we even kind of get going with this. I know Death Battle, probably from what my recent refreshing of their handling of fairy tale characters is about 0. They just don't seem to actually have anybody on their team that knows anything about the series. And it's like, yeah, you don't have to know anything about the series in general if you just wanted to like one versus another. But it's like they're making a video just saying like, who would win, let's do the research and everything, and then they don't really do the research whatsoever. So let's talk obviously about it. We'll play the video. This one's about as long as the Urza one. I don't think I'll need to pause as much as the Natsu video, but I'll probably have to do more so than the Urza just to talk about the obvious things that they miss. And I don't think I'll need to even really assess as much talking about like feats in full, because there's just very clear ones that dwarf anything than a Kamiga kill. Because like in a Kamiga kill, like some of the biggest things are like city level things. And I know that they mentioned like one of Esdeath's feats that like took prep time, but it's also not an offensive feat, so I don't know why they're scaling it offensively to her. It's weird. Race from another continent. Why did they even, former smoker? Why did they even mention that? Gray smoked for like the first few chapters. Not in the world. In the area. Like, she even mentions that she's not even that powerful. You know, the ice bazooka, what's funny is I actually reread part of that fight, him versus Leon, recently, and I always wonder, it's like, in Mishima's mind, was the explosion, just because when he draws the explosion, it looks more like a fiery explosion when he shoots the cannon, but obviously it would be like a coal explosion? I always just thought that was interesting in concept. At least this time versus when they did the Natsu one, they're actually using way more, like, official-looking panels, because that looks... I don't remember the exact dialogue if that's the official, but it's not horribly darker than the official release scans and looks clearly fan scanned. I don't think Esdeath has like straight cold resistance the same way too. Because sometimes characters have a weakness, not a weakness, but they're invulnerable to their same element, like for essentially for being like, yeah, I'm not going to be hurt by the same thing I specialize in, but sometimes they don't. Like anytime a character's like, yeah, I bounced your attack back and it still hurts them, it's like, well then clearly they're not in there. See, why are they jumping right to Lost Ice Shell? Like, I'm confused by that. Just, if they get it, I guess, so just to mention it in there. You just wouldn't remember. Like, what do you mean? It would just be a memory that's like kind of grayed out. I think my dog has a bone. Hold on. Brady, what are you chewing on? Come here. You're fine. It's like, why are they even bringing up Juvia in this? I'm so confused. Not Gray didn't really. Gray's life wasn't changed at that point from meeting Juvia. Like, him and Juvia didn't even get really that close for a while after she joined the guild and they met. Like, realistically, Gray and Juvia's relationship didn't really take like into a more positive turn until Tartaros. See, they can't say like resistant to ice attacks, where it's like you pretty much are immune. Like, there's a threshold obviously if somebody is dramatically stronger than you, but it's like you can adapt and copy to it. And I'm trying to think if they even mention it in this video. Made 600 kilometers of ice? Oh, kilotons. That's way more than that. Duped silver with a clone. I'm just looking at some of this stuff. So I'm willing to bet they don't even really discuss too much of like what Invul's ice does and how it works. That was years and years before. I don't know what they mean. That was silver specifically. Hold on, so this right here, this is... Let me see. See, this is not a very accurate map. Not in terms of this map itself, but like their distances, because it should be much larger than this, just based off of what we know with just based off of what we know from Brandish and her official size difference of Magnolia to Hargion is what, like 370 kilometers. So it's going to be almost probably like what, like 50+% more than this. But it's like they'll mention stuff, but then they won't go into anything about like, yeah, Invul casually did it. The whole bit about Ethereon scaling, the fact that Gray was able to withstand that without, like, before he even got stronger from getting back up and then throttled him. But then they did like this. They don't even go into like how big the planet is in the verse. They're talking about it from the idea that it's the size of Earth, but it's way bigger. And then they'll be like, yeah, you know, he's this fast, but then it's like they don't talk about all the light speed feats throughout the series. I'm actually very curious to know if they bring up the fact that Gray, obviously as a Ice Devil Slayer, would have a very clear advantage over somebody who's using Ice Demon related powers. I'm very curious about that because I don't remember if that's something they bring up. I know that they have Esdeath win, which is insane when you go into just the mechanics of how a Ice Devil Slayer works. Because like when they talk about Esdeath, again they bring up like the whole like, oh, Invul froze this area, as if like that was a big feat for him in terms of like AoE size. But that was just him starting to put in some effort, whereas for Esdeath, it's one of her 2 trump cards, but it's an environmental effect. It's not an offensive attack. I don't know. It's one of those things like I wonder if they just wanted to have her win, or if they just really understand the difference between things like environmental attacks and offensive attacks. Because you can have a character just use something that is going to put over the environment, but it doesn't mean it scales to your direct moves. You can go, for instance, another easy one is like Doflamingo in his bird cage. Yeah, he can cut up an island, but it's not like he does it instantly. It's a very slow moving thing that acts more as like a lockdown move rather than a attack. It's like, oh yeah, Esdeath uses this and eventually you freeze, but it's not like she's throwing all that power at you. I think they talk about her like making all the ice clones, but she did that over, I don't remember the exact amount of time, but I think she did it over some weeks. Nosk, where, buddy? Yeah, it's like, it's days of prep. It's not the same thing. That's not impressive though. Gray can eat. Gray just eat that. Just imagine like you pull that out to Gray. That's like being covered in Subway sandwiches. She's just crazy. I remember you, Esdeath. I thought Tatsumi was cool. Tatsumi was a nice guy. What are you talking about? It's like the same thing when it comes to hey, this is one that Gray literally would not even be bothered with because she can. It doesn't work on people with cold resistances. It's a fictional power. It doesn't have to make sense. Yeah, it wouldn't work on Gray Like, it didn't work on Tatsumi using his suit, and it was just like, oh yeah, I'm trying to remember what that dragon is called. It was like Rogue Dragon or Rebel Dragon. I don't remember exactly what the type of dragon is called. Oh, I forgot about that chick. I just saw one of the Jaeger chicks. I remember some of them are evil. Well, most of them are evil, but just like that bitch was annoying. But that's not a, it's again, that's not an offensive attack at all. I know that they like try and cut that up like, oh, well, she tried to do that just no. Yeah, it's like, yeah, not really the same thing. Not the same thing. That was a really annoying bit for me when I watched this the first time, because when you have this guy, like he's the biggest he's the biggest Tegu, and he's like city level to like mountain, maybe country level. It's not even remotely close to anything. No. Where did they scale that though? I've seen the, like, I read the manga and I watched the anime. I don't know where they're getting the scaling from. Where did they get 400 kilometers? But that's by far the strongest power in the entire series, other than maybe Tatsumi's suit, because that one's more about like evolution and you know, obviously like it can keep evolving, getting stronger, versus something that's just that powerful by default. Yeah, rip. Or maybe she was just an insane psychopath. Tartaros, buddy, we're talking here. I will always be victorious, no matter what gets in my way. Yeah, for if you've got simps running the show. Yeah, I'm very curious, like how in terms of drawing the fight, how goofy it's gonna look. I'm skipping their Blue Apron ad. Nope, I'm not watching your ad. Sorry. What's funny is like there's so many people obviously like in the overall world at this point when the series came out stronger than Gray. Not like so many, but just like imagine like Laxus showing up and just like one-shotting this bitch. Like Natsu just would just go up to her and then just body her. Why would they? So it's like, yeah, Gray gets knocked back by an ice attack like immediately. For any time that Gray's ever been bothered by an ice person, it's like, oh yeah, I have absurdly crazy ice certain abilities like Invul or Hakune. You're not just having somebody throw generic ice attack at him and he's like, ah. Like, why is Gray not eating any of her attacks? Like, I don't understand that. Tartarus quit. Like, obviously Gray doesn't like, he's not going to be in Ice Devil Slayer form at all points in time, but I don't see if he just, the point where he does that, it's just not over and there's nothing that Esdeath can do, because then at that point everything that she has is just going to like amp him up further and further, replenish his magic and stamina further and further, and there's going to be no point for her to get any form of recovery point. Because Esdeath doesn't have anything that helps her replenish her stamina, and there's nothing that she has that would really be like a threat at that point to Gray. Like, even if you talked about base Gray and maybe she could do stuff into base Gray, again, after the point where he goes into his Ice Devil form, there's nothing really she can do. Like, after this point, what does she do? Why did they not... let me pause it. I actually do want to bring this up. They intentionally show that Gray, when she uses the attack, eats something and then clearly like has the Slayer attribute of being able to do such, but they don't bring in the fact that it's going to make him stronger. And at this point, like, she doesn't have any means to hurt him. She can't damage him at all really at this point. He's just pretty much just fighting some chicken hand to hand. And Esdeath has nothing to really deal with the Ice Devil Slayer abilities. And on top of that, again, Gray's Ice Devil Slayer abilities would counter hers because her powers come from an Ice Devil, like an Ice Demon. Like, it's crazy to say, have Gray say she's too much and be like, jump right into Lost Ice Shell of all things. But this wouldn't work on Gray at all, too. Like, again, this is the crazy thing. It's like, how do they have her, like, what, throw like an ice arm at Gray and it beats Gray? I remember when I watched this, I was like annoyed, and then Gray like started to come out of the time stop, and I was like, thank God that they're not being too stupid. And then they had that where it's like she beats Gray by just throwing an ice attack. I mean, it's like, come on, how are they on a good track? And then, because it's like they were having it literally Gray contending and then Esdeath contending, and then the second Gray put up his Ice Devil form, it pretty much seemed to be over for her. And then somehow she ends up winning after a point where she shouldn't be able to harm him or do relatively any damage to him. It's one of those ones, again, they have, yeah, you can eat their attacks and blah, blah, but they don't go into the extent of what that does to be feeding your attacks into an Ice Devil Slayer. Because on top of that, it's not like every attack is going to throw the same level of recovery for a Slayer. If you want to say that Esdeath's, you know, I don't remember what the entire name of, I don't remember the name of what the whole like ice big environment freeze is called that she does. But if you wanted to argue the power output for it, and then you argue Gray eats it, or at least a portion of it, then Gray is eating a portion equivalent of that power. So he's then intaking that, and he's going to be making himself stronger in the process. Again, it's crazy to me that in Death Battle, they'll mention things and they'll bring things up, but they don't, sometimes I feel like they don't understand of what that really entails. Like that's something to me, like they mentioned it with, oh, they'll bring up something like Dragon Force with Natsu and Ace, but they don't really talk about the fact that, oh yeah, if Ace just kept throwing attacks at Natsu, eventually Natsu is going to eat enough fire and then go and, you know, it's not like my option now, I can go into Dragon Force. It automatically at a point will push him into Dragon Force, and then that's that. And it's not so much as like Urza and Zoro. Urza and Zoro was more of, they just didn't really go into any of Urza's big feats or scaling whatsoever, and they downplayed the living hell out of her. Whereas with this one, it's like, it's weird that they did more research, not by a lot, but still more research in aspects of Gray, and then just didn't follow up on, again, eating the attacks, being immune to the attacks, copying and adapting to the attacks. What is it going to really mean? Because Gray, and this is one of the, Gray with Hakune, obviously that didn't happen at the time, but Gray went up against Invul, and Invul's True Ice freezes people despite resistances to the cold. So no matter what, even if you're like, oh man, I specialize in ice, I'm not hurt by ice, you're still going to be hurt by it. But Gray was able to adapt to it in real time. So as long as Gray has the ability to adapt to something and does it, it doesn't really matter how, like, if you have like an extra broken thing on like the ice, or you argue her ice is colder or whatnot, or you argue her ice is way more powerful, which again it isn't. But even if you make that argument, as long as Gray just adapts to it, there's nothing that you could really do on Esdeath's side. Again, this is a goofy one. I don't think it's as bad as, well, the thing about Natsu versus Ace is it's very clear they understood Natsu really just has to get in one hit. But like, if you watch the video, in the first like 10 seconds, Natsu goes to hit Ace and then goes through him because of his Logi intangibility. But because Natsu's a Fire Dragon Slayer, he can touch fire as if it's solid material. So really the fight would be over immediately. Like that point, done, the fight would end. Whereas with this one, it's way more so fight-ish early on, and then the second Gray goes in his Devil Slaying form, it should be over. Like there shouldn't be really anything that Esdeath can do at that point in combat against Gray the second he pops that out. But anyway, tell me your thoughts about this. I pray that we're not going to get any more Fairy Tail videos in Death Battle. I mean, if they do, I'll react to them, I'll talk about them. And I would like to actually, like, if they do another one, we'll do like an actual live breakdown probably. Maybe if they do it like in another year or so, we'll actually like live stream it or something and kind of like go into it, and I'll answer any questions as like we're watching through. But tell me your thoughts about this. Like there's very few times I've ever watched a death battle video and I've been like, yeah, man, they were pretty good on this. Like I said, I think the only one that I really watched was really, I think, spot on was Kirby. But I think that like Kirby's pretty easy to kind of gauge. You kind of just have to play like the last chunk of each of the game, and that's where you're getting a majority of like Kirby's feats. Whereas obviously watching an entire bit of a show, and there's like 10 times more content into Fairy Tail than there is in Kame Ga Kill. So, and on top of that, you don't have to really understand as much about Esdeath's powers versus like you have to understand how a Slayer works mechanically for fights like this. And that's why I feel like it's dumb for people to even include Slayer Wizards a lot of the time into same attribute matches, because either they won't understand how Slayers work, or when you do explain to them, they think, oh, that's totally unfair, blah, blah, you know, why even put them against them? It's like, well, no, that's, you shouldn't be putting Slayers up against the same element, because they're designed literally to counter them. Again, and then they didn't even bring up the fact that Esdeath's powers come from like an ice demon, and for some reason none of Gray's ice devil aspects did anything to her at all. Like it literally has like extra bonus effects and neutralization effects when he's fighting devils and demons. But anyway, other than that, comment below, tell me your thoughts are about this one. Does anybody disagree with my takes on these last three, on the 3 Fairy Tail death battles? Because I really think they're bad. Natsu, I'm surprised they didn't have Natsu somehow lose to Ace. There was at least the fact that Natsu won that one, but I just don't think that they have any real grasp on the series when it comes down to it. And I'm guessing it like I feel like if Ace just had a handful of better feats, they would have given it to Ace despite obvious advantages Natsu has. But anyway, other than that, comment below, tell me your thoughts are, and I'll check you guys out on the next one.